April 1985, Raleigh, North Carolina. Minnie Edwards came out of her house that spring morning determined to make an important decision in her life. She had just turned 66, and she had decided to move into a retirement center and sell her house. It was spring, but the leaves from last fall were laying all over the yard. The spring onions and weeds were sprouting up. The red roses that Robert had planted for their 25th wedding anniversary were blooming, but the bushes had grown tall from lack of pruning since he died, and the roses were bent over, almost touching the ground. She walked down the street to the Methodist Church where she had attended worship most of her life and entered Reverend Harmon's office. He greeted her warmly. "Come on in, Miss Minnie. I haven't talked with you in a long time. How's everything going?" "Well, not so good, preacher. I'm tired and I'm lonely. It's not been easy trying to take care of that big house since Bob died, you know. The girls are married and gone. Joy is working in Chicago and hardly ever visits. Angela and her husband, well, they live in San Francisco. Maybe I'll see them for Thanksgiving. I don't know. My house and yard need a lot of work, and every other house in that cul-de-sac needs a lot of attention too. All of my old neighbors have moved away or died over the last few years. New people have moved in. They got old cars and noisy pickup trucks sitting on the street. I hear some of the children playing and laughing outside, but I can't understand them. I don't even think these people speak English. So I've been doing some research on retirement centers here around Raleigh. Which one would you recommend?" Reverend Harmon listened and thought for a minute, scratched his head, and then he responded, "Now, Miss Minnie, are you still baking? Do you still make that chocolate layer cake with all those little layers like I like it?" Surprised, Minnie looked at him and said, "Well, preacher, you want me to bake you a cake? I haven't been in the mood for that for quite a while, but I'll make you one if that's what you want." The preacher continued with his advice. "Well, no. I tell you what to do. If you go home this afternoon and you bake that cake, and you walk over to that house next door, knock on the door and hand them that cake, and you come see me next week." Reluctantly, Minnie agreed. "Well, I don't know anything about them, but I don't think they're Americans. They got some kids. I don't know what I'm going to say." It's a month later. Minnie Edwards has come out of her house and decided to walk to the church to visit the preacher. "Hi, Miss Minnie. Haven't seen you for a while." "Well, who you got there with you?" Minnie is pushing a baby stroller with a 9-month-old baby in it. And beside her is a little 4-year-old Latino boy. "Well, this is Maribella and Roberto, 2 of the children that live next door to me. Aren't they just the cutest things you've ever seen?" "Well, I tell you, preacher, I went home last month, just like you said, baked that cake like you told me, and I went to that house. I felt so stupid. I knocked on the door, and this short Mexican woman came to the door smiling, and she greeted me in Spanish, I guess. I just stood there speechless and handed her the cake. She motioned for me to come on in and sit down. That house, it was so sad. It didn't look anything like I remembered it when Violet used to live there a few years ago. In the living room was an old sofa with a blanket thrown over it and a chair. and an old TV in the corner. The children had a few toys on the floor. There was a small wooden table in the dining room, and we sat down there. She went to the kitchen and brought me a cup of coffee. We cut the cake. We talked a little bit. She could speak some English, simple sentences, and I understood most of what she said, even though she had a really strong Spanish accent. The next morning was Saturday, and I woke up to the sound of yard machinery, leaf blowers, hedgers. There was a very tanned Mexican man and a 12-year-old boy out there cleaning up my yard. They gathered up all the leaves, mowed the grass, edged the sidewalks, and even trimmed up my rose garden. Everything looked so good. They cut off a dozen of the red roses and they handed them to me. I learned later that Maria and Jose had immigrated here several years ago and were renting this house. Maria had an offer to work in the laundry in the hotel, but she needed someone to help her out with the kids. I love these children. Maria and I have been cooking together too. I showed her how to bake my cake, and she showed me how to cook Mexican style. April 2014. There's a reception at Minnie's house. Miss Minnie died this past week. She was 95 years old and still living alone in her own house on that cul-de-sac. At the reception in her grand parlor was a collection of food from all over the world. And in the middle of the table was one great big chocolate layer cake with all those little layers. There was a large group of people, many cultural backgrounds that were her neighbors. Apparently, Miss Minnie had not just baked one cake, but over the last 29 years, she had baked a cake for every neighbor that moved onto her street. She had babysat and kept children for nearly every family. Now those babies had grown up and had babies of their own. Everyone knew and loved Miss Minnie. All of the houses had been freshly painted now. All the yards were neatly trimmed. And the cul-de-sac was as beautiful as it had ever been. As I drove away, I saw that every home had at least one rose bush in the corner of the yard. Miss Minnie had made quite an impact on many lives, just as that one chocolate cake had changed her life forever too. So when we feel all alone and sad, just go home and bake a cake and find somebody to give it to. You never know where that will lead you.